Hello, I read The Black Swordsman. I started reading Berserk. I have a lot to talk about with this particular section. I've read the first 6 volumes because I wanted to make sure I actually like the story before I tell the internet, and I do. So let's talk about the Black Swordsman arc. There's a lot that holds me back from liking the series based off of the first arc alone. The second arc we're doing just fine. But just based off of Black Swordsman, there's a lot that holds me back, but one thing that propels me forward from the beginning is Guts. First of all, the art around him is fantastic, from the giant sword that he wields to the shading that I think implies so much about what he's experiencing internally. He's willing to do anything. Right from the jump, we see him hiding under a pile of corpses in order to get his kill. And it would be really easy to see Guts as your standard, stoic, chip on his shoulder, revenge-seeking, boring, edgelord, generic character. But there's so much beneath the surface that makes me desperately want to understand him. So we're going to talk about Guts for a second before we get into the plot. So he says that anyone who dies because they get caught up in someone else's fight, that they deserve it, and that a life not living the way you want is not worth living at all. He can't stand weaklings who can't do anything for themselves. He wants to crush them. I guess he believes that everyone should be fighting with everything they've got, and if they don't, then he has no respect for them. We see some of that in Vargas as well, as Guts is pretty cruel to him. He says he looks like a monster, but this came right after Vargas was begging Guts to bring vengeance on his behalf. So I do wonder if the outburst came from his disgust at Vargas's actions, his weakness, his begging, rather than his appearance. And that's the thing with Guts, is a lot of times he'll say something, but looking at the context around him, the body language, the actions, it doesn't always align exactly with what he's saying, which is the main thing that makes him such an interesting character to me. Anyone that tries to latch on to him, he pushes them away. He doesn't want anyone to show him concern, and he doesn't want a companion. But he also doesn't want lives needlessly snuffed out. When strangers offer him a ride, he initially turns them down because he's being hunted and he knows that he would leave them vulnerable if he were with them. He does end up taking the ride, but when the skeletons come, he tells them to stay back in the carriage while he handles it all. The skeleton forest is my favorite fight in this arc. Not my favorite scene, but my favorite arc because it looks so cool, but also because it, I think, reveals a lot about Guts. Despite pushing the priest and the daughter away and telling them to stay in the carriage, the daughter is killed, and just look at that panel. I can hear the silence of it. I love Mira's paneling, even more so in Golden Age, but even here as well. But the way he draws this scene with these little moments, like windows, that build to what everyone is looking at, and then the noiselessness around her as she's buckled over with impact. There's no need to be gruesome in the scene. The silhouette does the job far better than any amount of gore could. And after that moment of singular impact, then the skeletons come, and oh, it's so good. I admit that a good part of my enjoyment of this story is big sword makes brain go burr. Every time Guts starts swinging this hunk of iron, my brain turns off and I just watch the action. But one thing that I do notice is I love how Guts' face goes from shrouded to totally black as he goes into fight mode. Mira oftentimes does choose to show his expressions, and he uses shadows to shroud his face as well. But then there's the times when he goes berserk, and there's nothing in him but the fight. And it's also noticeable to me that each time he faces an enemy like this, he gets this look in his eyes like excitement. It's like there's this thrill of the battle that comes over him before he launches into what I read as complete focus on the battle. Like he goes into this sort of zen state and loses himself in the fight. Forgive me if this is totally off. Keep in mind that I am still really early on in the series, and a lot of my perceptions and ideas about these characters and about what the story is doing are going to shift as time goes on, but this is just my initial, this is what I'm seeing and trying to understand so far, because I do find Guts difficult to understand in some respects, but I'm trying. This is my attempt. Anyway, back to Skeleton Forest and the little girl. So she shows back up with the severed head of her father, and again, the shading on her face is perfectly effective. But even more effective is the fact that what snaps Guts out of his fight mode is the sight of her. And after all this fighting, he finally falters. He's taken down swarms of undead creatures, but the sight of the little girl that made sure he stayed warm while he slept made him pause long enough to be stabbed. This to me says so much about Guts, that he can go into this blank battle mode where he's lost in the action of the fight, but then be taken out of it with just the sight of her. That he pauses long enough to be injured when he easily could have taken her out just like everything else he's been fighting. He showed a second of hesitation because of his compassion, but when it came down to it, he still made the strike to kill her. Well, I mean, she was already dead, but you know, to cut her in half. He still did what needed done despite that compassion causing him to pause. Just look at this page. Look at the positioning of her arm and how little the blade actually went in. This was the weakest attack of the night, yet it's what hit. And look at the look on his face. His focus was completely broken and he looks surprised at what's happening to him. Then the single strike that ends it, followed by nothing. Just the blood flying, and then Guts turns away so we can't see his face. And what happens next? He throws up. He's sick over this. Oh, he'll still throw himself back into the fight, but it's affected him. And when he's done and he's tired and weak, he'll look over at her for panels, just staring at the little girl that he had to kill. Or cut in half. She was already dead. At least until Puck tries to show him compassion. Then he's back to pushing him away and acting like it's nothing. At least that's the way I read the scene. And I still don't totally understand why he laughs here, or any of the several times that he laughs in this arc. He laughs when Puck asks, "What about when you saved me?" He laughs when Puck tells him that the little girl's death is not his fault. Laughs when Puck thinks he came to save Vargas. Laughs after he cuts up the Count in front of Teresa. It seems like closing the door on his emotions and creating distance from the emotional bonding that's being attempted. But when he was laughing about Vargas's execution, that's when Puck says that he's filled with violent emotions, self-hating, destructive, and fear. And Puck says he's afraid to admit that he's just like Vargas, fighting a losing battle just like him. So maybe he's laughing to distance himself from all vulnerability. He clings to his humanity in the external sense. He won't do the things that the Count and the others are doing. But is he fracturing his humanity by rejecting the emotions that make him human? I don't know. Speaking of things I'm not sure of yet, I still don't know what this thing is, but it took on the face of the guy he let die, Vargas. So my guess is that it's something or someone that he failed to save. It's also noticeable that when he had a nightmare, he was in this claustrophobic space with an eye looking down on him. The eye of the thing, I think. And this thing was there, assumedly the eye that was watching him in the last panel, but it's also notable that he's naked and without his prosthetic in this dream of vulnerability. I don't know what any of this means yet, but my guess, my stab in the dark, is that this represents 3 traumas for him. The thing, like I said, potentially something that he failed to save. The prosthetic would be something that was taken from him, potentially a betrayal of a friend. The nakedness, we can assume, at least I assume I know what that is, having read, you know, the first couple volumes of Golden Age. There is a trauma right at the beginning of Golden Age that would represent that quite well. It is interesting to me that this thing is the largest of the 3. Now, it's the only thing you can scale easily, but it makes me wonder if this is maybe the most traumatic thing of the 3, or if it's the most recent thing, or maybe I'm reading too far into all of this. Okay, I've said a lot of positive things, now it's time to go into the negative. I don't like the Count at all, until the very end. He's not an interesting villain to me. Now, we did interesting things with him at the end of the arc, but he himself was so unconvincing. If I thought that this was how all the villains of the series were going to be, I would not read on, even with my fascination for Guts. We just fight him for so long, and it's just this big blob monster that you cut down, and he just reforms and keeps coming back. It's not interesting to me, even if the art is fantastic. Giant blob monster that you fight again and again while it mocks your humanity and then blobs again. I discussed the volumes on my Patreon, and it got to a point where I just started mocking him every time he came on the page. I also analyzed the story over there, but this is what you get to see instead. I do love the role that Teresa plays though, as he clearly loves his daughter, but she sees how much he's changed and recoils away from him. He's caged her, and now she fears the world, but also fears what's inside her cage. I love the scene where the doors break and Teresa has the opportunity to leave her room, but she hesitates, terrified to face her demons because of the fear that's been built up all this time in her cage. But look at the resolution on her face as she pushes the doors open and takes her fate into her own hands, only to be faced with the demon that is what her father has become. Oh, it's so good. Anyway, there's that look in Guts' eyes again that I attribute to bloodlust or the thrill of the fight. And there he is, pulling Teresa in front of him as a shield because he could identify Blob Monster's weakness. It's so calloused, or calculated, you might could say. I love it so much. And I'm just gonna say again that the art in the series is incredible. Page after page of pieces of art. So Guts goes berserk, and I mean, really berserk? I take this as him relishing in showing the weakness of being immortal, since the weakness of humanity has been so emphasized by those who have surrendered their own. So he's showing the cost of that surrender. What is it like to never die at the hands of someone more powerful than you? And this is where we're introduced to the God Hand. And like I said, as I filmed this video, I'm 6 volumes in, so I know who Griffith is. And I'm very intrigued by how we got here. How we'll get to the point where Griffith sacrifices him. Look at the rage and guts at being dismissed this way by Griffith. This is a section with the Count that I love because of what the God Hand does to him, what they do to manipulate the situation. He's already sacrificed his wife, but that was out of rage, that was out of betrayal. He loved her and didn't want to kill her, and this was an opportunity for him to forsake his emotions, to gain more power, and, you know, he's kind of mad at her in this moment. But his daughter hasn't wronged him, and in every way doesn't deserve the same fate. Yet, the God Hand tells him, you can't sacrifice Guts for this. It has to be something you care about again. It has to be her. And the way they present the situation is, you've already come this far. There's no turning back. There's no redeeming what you've done. There's no going backwards from here. You're already fated. You've already condemned yourself with your previous actions. The only choice is to fall in that condemnation or continue down this path. You've already surrendered so much of your humanity. He's already barely human anymore. So they point to what little is left of his humanity and say, now give us that too, or get nothing. I admit, and this might be controversial, I don't like their designs. They seem very try-hard to me, but I love what they've done here as just a force of pure evil. The God Hand telling him that his fate is already sealed, that he's already condemned himself with his first act, so the only road is to finish the job. It's such a compelling argument, especially in the heat of the moment, pointing out that there's really no hope for him anyway, so why not just go all the way? And look at this stunning panel as he looks into his daughter's eyes and makes his choice. All that emotion that Mira pours into these panels is so effective. And how satisfying that he chose to keep the tiny bit of humanity that he had left and to save his daughter. Which meant destroying himself, but at least he didn't destroy her. Also, the guy he half cannibalized being the one to drag him into hell was such a nice touch. They tried to drag Guts off too, I guess because of his brand, because he's already been sacrificed. And even as he's being dragged into hell, his whole mind is focused on getting one last shot out in an attempt to kill Griffith, and it missed. Okay, now for my favorite scene in this arc, which is the aftermath, when Teresa is completely distraught, when she's crumbled and she's wishing for death. I love the paneling of this scene. Just 3 short windows of her sensing him behind her, and then she looks and the focal point is him, standing there, leaning on his sword. And then you turn the page and he says this. The way I interpret this is that he saw Teresa collapsing in on herself, and he puts her wish into her own hand. You want to die? Here's a knife. Do it then. It's a horrible thing to do to a child, obviously, but in this particular context, I read Guts as forcing her to take control of her own fate rather than surrendering, and making himself into her enemy to give her a reason to keep on living. And when she falls and she's going to die outside of her own free will, he saves her. He extends the very thing that he relies on more than anything to preserve his own life. And again, not to sound like a broken record, but oh my goodness, look at this art! Anyway, because I've read the beginning of Golden Age, I now know how important it is for Guts to always have his sword within arm's reach. It wasn't lost on me as I flipped back through these panels to prepare for this video that he catches her with that sword. It causes her pain, but it also saves her life. But I don't understand why he reacted like this. Back to why he gave her the knife. Like I said, I think he was making himself into her enemy to give her a reason to keep on living. I think that's the reason he's still living right now, or at least a big part of it. If she has a reason to seek revenge, well, maybe she'll keep fighting, just like he has. And when she pledges herself against him, he willingly takes on that role. But when he turned his back and broke for a second, I started crying too. It's such a powerful panel. He clearly has a tenderness for kids, and I'm sure standing there so cold while she went through that and pushing her in the way that would force her to fight for herself was incredibly hard for him. But it's what he believed was the best thing for her. But he only broke for a second, and then we get one panel of him composing himself, and then he's back to stoic Guts. My favorite scene of the arc, my favorite page of the arc. Like I said, there are some ideas or phrases or challenges that are repeated quite a bit throughout this 3-volume arc. So I think, at least at this point, I feel like I have a decent grasp of at least the initial themes of the series that are that Mira is attempting to present. One being that those who have forfeited their humanity, they look down on the mere mortals. But Guts, in his quest for revenge, could probably utilize some of the power that comes with this forsaking of humanity, but he refuses to, and instead he actually clings to his humanity and even takes pride in it. Over and over, we watch Guts be mocked for his weakness in humanity, and then he overcomes the one that's mocking him, and usually with an awesome spread that emphasizes how incredible it is that he can overcome this. But Guts makes it clear that it's humanity's drive to live, no matter what they're going through, that makes him strong. And when I say over and over again, I really mean over and over. The fact that you're mortal means that you're weaker than me. Rawr! And yes, in fact, he embraces it. Which is interesting because it's the desperate cry to live that activates the Behelit. So the will to live is what sets humanity apart, but it's also what calls those who would strip you of that humanity in a bid for immortality? I'm still working it out. The Behelit that we first see was stolen from the Count, and before the Count got a hold of it, he was cruel, but he was still human. Then he seemed to lose what humanity he had and started hunting and eating people for his own pleasure. We know that the Behelit is a key to a portal to another world that overlaps our own, and it summons the God Hand from the dimension, and that they've manipulated the dark side of human history since ancient times. The Count supposedly got it by chance by some traveling merchants that didn't know what it was, which sounds suspicious. I'm not sure about all that. Anyway, Guts has it now, so here's hoping it doesn't screw everything up for him. And along with that, we get the scene from Puck, which feels significant to me. He said, "I think that people need to keep living. I don't know much about life, but living for the future is more important than trying to avenge the past." This feels significant because what is Guts living for right now, right? I mean, he's on a quest for revenge, and he's thrown his entire life into that. It makes me think that that's an indication of the path that we're going down. Guts realizing that revenge is unsatisfying ultimately, and learning to live for the future as opposed to trying to avenge the past. But also the story's pretty dark, so I'm not really sure we are going to go in a hopeful direction where we realize revenge is unfruitful and then we find a new life for ourselves. I mean, that sounds nice. Plenty of stories have done it. I don't know that this one will. But along with that, fate is obviously a huge theme for the story as well. From the very first chapter, we're told that fighting for your own fate is futile and worthless. Sucks for Guts. But it's repeated a few times that Guts' fate is preordained by the brand and that divine providence can't be thwarted by man's efforts. But they also repeatedly say that Guts is just a weak human and fighting them physically is futile. And he repeatedly proves them wrong. So maybe he's going to prove them wrong about what's fated as well and how much his free will can counter what's fated. When Guts is fighting through the pain from the brand because he's so close to evil, and so the brand is causing him a bunch of pain, and he's getting up and continuing forward anyway, and they're impressed by him, and they say, "Wow, we'd really love to have someone like that among our ranks." And then another member of the God Hand says, "No, it's not been fated. It hasn't been ordained by the laws of fate, so he can't be among them." But the Count is being risen among their ranks by his own free will. It's by him choosing to make the sacrifice of his wife, and when he's given the opportunity to move forward, to advance further, it is by his free will that he chooses not to surrender that opportunity because he won't sacrifice his daughter. So they're saying all these things are fated, but in action, it looks like there is an amount of personal choice and will that is leading to these fates happening. Do you know what I'm saying? So what is the relationship between these supposed laws of fate and free will in this story? I don't know. I haven't figured it out. We also get a flashback of Griffith and Guts, where Griffith talks quite a bit about us all being at the mercy of fate, but he also says that he wants to know what his place is in the world, who he is, what he's destined for, which is similar to something Guts says in Volume 4, but I'm making a point not to overextend this video into the next arc, so I'm just making a note here that finding your place in the world and where you're going might also be a theme of the story. I'll also note that they said the Count's wife was the one that he loved most and hated the most. He didn't hate Teresa though, and therefore he couldn't sacrifice her. So I'm wondering if both love and hate must be present for a mortal to choose to make a sacrifice. We do get a glimpse into Guts' past as he remembers that Vargas was dismembered and eaten while he's touching what's been taken from him. And it's clear that all, or at the very least many, apostles eat human flesh, not just the Count. So my question is, did Griffith? Because you're an apostle before you could potentially be among the ranks of the God Hand, as far as I understand it at this point. So that would mean that Griffith was an apostle first too, right? Which would mean... Did he eat Guts' arm? And his eye? I can't imagine it. But I mean, I don't know. Then Guts reflects that Vargas says that the Count took his wife and his son before his eyes, and that there was nothing that he could do, that he was a prisoner of fear, and Guts touches his brand while he remembers that particular line. These parallels between the two of them do seem to bother him a lot. And again, I refer back to the page where Puck feels Guts' emotions and asks if he's afraid, which I think is a side of him that he doesn't want to exist because he doesn't want to be like Vargas. I mean, clearly he doesn't, but weak and inactive like Vargas. But also not void of humanity like the Count. So now my question is, who was taken from Guts? I mean, I don't, maybe no one, but that's what I'm drawing here, is not just what, you know, not just his arm and his eye, but potentially who. I'm probably reading way too much into everything. Anyway, overall, I was with the Black Swordsman, I was not super impressed with the villains, even though the artwork is fantastic. Just the whole, like, we transform into this creature, Guts fights them, Guts overpowers them, formula just it's not very interesting to me. But the characterization is very interesting to me, and I did continue on into Golden Age, and I love it so far. So these are my 2 long thoughts for Black Swordsman. Not the best start to a series that I've ever read. At least not from my perspective. It didn't suit me, and I may not have even continued on with the series, but I did, and I am glad that I started here because of the world building that I got here. So as the mysteries are starting to build up in Golden Age, I'm paying closer attention and I'm more interested in how do we get here? So there you go. I apologize for everything that I've misunderstood. Please do chat with me more in the comments if you feel like it. I would love to chat with you more there. I have quite a few volumes still to read before I get to the end of Golden Age, and we'll have another video out on this, but if you want to chat with me as I'm reading through the volumes, not live reading, but after I finish a volume, I pop over onto my Patreon and have a chat with everyone on the Discord there, so feel free to check that out if you want. That's linked in the description. I'll see you again soon. Bye.